Usually when you look at a massive towering skyscraper, there's this automatic, almost subconscious assumption of strength.
Oh, totally. You just see the size and assume it's stable.
Right. You see the gleaming glass exterior, the steel framework reaching up into the clouds, and the sheer scale and volume of it just, well, your brain immediately registers that visual dominance as invincibility.
It's comforting, honestly, to look at something huge and assume it's permanent simply because it takes up so much space.
Exactly. You figure anything that big must have been built to withstand, like anything. But if you actually talk to a structural engineer about how these things work, you get a very different story.
Yeah, the visible size actually tells you nothing about the structural integrity.
Right. Because if the foundation is compromised in a way you can't see, or if the internal load-bearing mechanics aren't designed to distribute stress properly, all that glass and steel is basically nothing.
It's just a really heavy, fragile illusion waiting for the right gust of wind.
Or the right seismic shift. And suddenly, that pristine skyscraper isn't a symbol of power at all. It's like the ultimate definition of structural fragility.
I mean, it literally becomes an architectural house of cards. And that shift in perspective, going from just admiring the impressive facade to actually interrogating the foundation, is essential.
It's everything, especially if you want to understand how things survive over the long haul.
Because we tend to equate visible size with structural permanence in almost every area of life. We assume a massive organization or a sprawling community is inherently resilient just because it takes up a lot of space in the cultural skyline.
Right, but the reality of organizational physics operates completely differently, doesn't it?
It really does. The metrics we use to measure success on the outside often mask this deep rot on the inside.
And that tension, that exact tension between visible size and hidden fragility is our entire mission for you today.
Because we know you, the listener, are constantly looking for those aha moments. You want to understand the mechanics behind things.
Exactly. You are the learner, and today we are doing a deep dive into a fundamental paradigm shift. We're looking at how we think about growth, leadership, and community building.
Yeah, and we're drawing this from a really profound, deeply analytical text called Recovering Apostolic DNA, From Addition to Multiplication.
And the core argument here is just fascinating. It challenges the very mechanics of how lasting movements actually grow.
It does,
Yeah.
because we constantly see organizations that look absolutely massive on the outside, but they just crumble the moment any real pressure is applied.
Right. Meanwhile, you have other groups that look completely unimpressive by modern standards. They're small, quiet, seemingly under-resourced.
But they possess this unstoppable self-reproducing life. The kind of life that can outlast empires and generational shifts.
It's wild to wrap your head around. And the provocation here is just, well, it's profound. Because we generally operate under the assumption that if an organization isn't growing, the problem is just a lack of effort.
Or a lack of funding.
Yeah.
Or maybe they just need a more visionary leader. That's the default assumption.
Yeah. But what if the greatest obstacle to growth isn't a lack of resources at all? What if the primary obstacle is a fundamental misunderstanding of how growth actually happens in the first place?
Right, because if the architectural blueprint you are using is flawed from the start, throwing more money and energy at the construction site just means you're building a fragile structure faster.
You are quite literally designing a system to fail under its own weight. Which brings us to the default blueprint that most modern leadership relies on.
The addition model.
Yes, the logic of addition. It's the operational philosophy for almost every major institution, corporation, and large-scale community group today.
The instinct is always to build strength by just piling things on.
Exact. You want a stronger community, add more people to the room.
You want more impact. Add more programs to the calendar.
Yeah.
Add more staff to the payroll.
Increase the marketing budget, launch more events. It all revolves around gathering more mass into one centralized location.
Or around one centralized brand. And from a purely managerial perspective, I mean, the logic of addition feels incredibly responsible.
Oh, for sure. It's visible. It's highly measurable.
Right. It translates beautifully onto a spreadsheet. You can sit in a boardroom, point to a graph, and show that attendance is up by 20%, revenue is up by 15%.
So therefore, the organization is obviously thriving.
Exactly. And the dopamine hit of those metrics is just intoxicating for a leader. But visible activity is not the same thing as reproduction.
That is such a crucial distinction.
It is, because a system can become incredibly busy. It can attract massive crowds, build breathtaking infrastructure, and yet remain completely sterile.
Meaning it can't actually reproduce itself.
Right. It just accumulates.
Accumulation versus reproduction. Just thinking about that distinction completely changes how you view a packed auditorium.
Doesn't it? If you're operating on the logic of addition, you look at a room with 5,000 people and say, we did it, we won.
But if you understand the ecology of multiplication or generation, as the text often frames it, you ask a fundamentally different question.
You don't ask, how can we gather more people into this room?
Right. You ask, how can we impart life that can be carried and multiplied far beyond this room?
Because addition is obsessed with hoarding resources and people around a single magnetic center.
Whereas multiplication is obsessed with creating internal capacity in ordinary people, so the life of the movement travels outward organically.
And the mechanical difference between those two approaches is staggering. I mean, accumulation inherently creates consumers.
Oh, absolutely. When you build a system designed to gather people around a spectacular event or a highly produced experience, those people arrive, they consume the product, and then they leave.
And because of that dynamic, the entire system becomes dangerously dependent on constant external input. You need a few highly gifted people at the center to keep the show going.
The moment the production value drops, the consumers just go elsewhere. You know, I picture this exactly like running on a treadmill at the gym.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. When you build a centralized, addition-based organization, you are the person running on the treadmill, and the machine is plugged into the wall.
And you just have to keep pumping relentless, exhausting energy into the system just to maintain your current position.
Exactly. You're sweating, your heart rate is maxed out, the belt is moving incredibly fast, and it looks like a lot of intense activity.
But you aren't actually going anywhere.
No. The footprint of your impact hasn't expanded at all. You're just working harder to keep the belt moving.
And the terrifying part of the treadmill model is what happens when the power cord gets pulled.
Yeah, what happened?
If the budget drops, or if the charismatic leader gets burnt out and just steps off the machine, the entire system stops instantly.
Instantly, it just dies.
Right. And that structural fragility is what organizational theorists call the bottleneck problem.
The bottleneck problem. Because everything has to go through the top.
Exactly. When central control is the highest value, every decision, every new initiative, every ounce of vitality has to filter through a central authority or a committee.
Which, on paper, looks like a brilliantly managed, hyper-efficient machine.
But in reality, it operates like a massive warehouse holding inventory.
Yeah.
The life of the organization doesn't actually reside in the people.
Right, it resides in the machinery, and the people are just inventory being managed.
Yes. But a living, breathing organism operates through distributed life, not centralized warehousing.
The text actually has an amazing analogy about two fields that illustrates this bottleneck perfectly.
Two farmers.
Yeah. Visualize a farmer working field A. This farmer goes to the market, buys a ton of expensive seed, painstakingly plants it, tends to it, and eventually gets a massive, beautiful crop.
A huge success by all standard metrics.
Right. But the specific genetic modification of that crop means it doesn't produce its own seed.
Oh, wow.
So the very next season, the farmer has to start from absolute zero. They have to go back to the market, spend more money, buy more seed, and replant the entire field from scratch.
And that is the exact definition of the addition model. The field is only productive because the farmer is perpetually exhausted, constantly supplying the external input.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. But then compare that to the farmer working field B.
Okay, what's different about field B?
The initial labor is similar, preparing the soil, planting the seed. But the genetic makeup of the plants in field B is fundamentally different. These plants bear their own seed.
Okay, so when the crop grows in one season, it automatically generates the seed required for the next season's crop.
Exactly. It becomes a self-propagating ecology. The field still requires maintenance and care, obviously, but it possesses internal reproductive capacity.
The farmer isn't the sole source of life anymore. The life is embedded in the crop itself.
And that is the essence of multiplication. Field A requires life support. Field B carries life forward.
That's a powerful way to put it. Because if you look around at most modern organizations, we have built a culture obsessed with field A.
We really have. We celebrate the exhausted leader who single-handedly drags the organization across the finish line every quarter.
But if that addition model is actually a flawed default that just builds fragile warehouses, it forces us to reconsider the original architecture of historical movements.
Like, how did things grow before we had mass media, massive budgets, and centralized management software?
Right. We have to look at the historical and biblical blueprint of true movements. And the framework introduced here relies heavily on a concept called apostolic DNA.
Which we need to pause on for a second, because that term carries a lot of baggage that needs to be
It
unpacked.
really does.
Because when people hear the word apostolic, it instantly triggers images of rigid hierarchies.
Oh yeah, people picture guys in ornate robes or heavy institutional authority.
Right, or some sort of elite spiritual celebrity status where one person stands at the top of a pyramid barking orders at everyone below them.
Which is an entirely modern institutional corruption of the word. The text strips away all that hierarchical and cultural baggage.
Okay, so how does the text actually define it?
It frames apostolic DNA not as an office, a title, or a status, but as a biological and ecological reality.
Biological.
Yes, it describes a specific, observable type of life. It is life that pioneers into new spaces. It establishes a foundation, and most crucially, it is life that intrinsically reproduces.
So it's literally like genetic code.
Exactly. Think of it as the genetic code of a movement that fundamentally refuses to be contained within a single building or managed by a single bureaucratic center.
That makes so much more sense. But if that biological imperative to reproduce is the DNA, how does that DNA actually replicate in the real world?
Well, the blueprint for this replication is often traced back to a very specific sentence in an ancient letter.
A letter written by the Apostle Paul to a younger leader named Timothy, right?
Right. Specifically, 2 Timothy 2.2. And this verse operates as the ultimate movement blueprint. It says, "What you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also."
And on the surface, I mean, that just sounds like standard common sense mentoring advice.
Just a senior leader telling a junior leader to pass on the company handbook.
Exactly. But there is an entire ecology of ministry hidden in that phrasing.
There really is. There are actually 4 distinct generations of transmission embedded in that single sentence.
Let's map that out. Generation 1 would be Paul himself. What you have heard from me.
Right. Generation 2 is Timothy, the recipient. What you have heard.
Then Generation 3 is the next tier, entrust to faithful people.
And Generation 4 is the horizon line, who will be able to teach others also.
So in one breath, Paul isn't just handing off information.
No, he is mapping out a living chain of transmission that extends 4 layers deep into the future. He is commissioning a self-replicating system.
And what's wild is the context surrounding this letter. It elevates it from just good advice to a literal survival imperative.
Yeah, context is everything here.
Because Paul isn't sitting in a corner office with a whiteboard mapping out a 5-year strategic growth plan. He is writing this letter from a Roman prison cell.
He is facing imminent execution.
Right. The existential threat of that context is the key to understanding the methodology.
Absolutely. Because when a movement is under extreme pressure, when it faces aggressive persecution or the threat of being entirely wiped out, its priorities shift violently
It instantly abandons the luxury of maintenance.
and becomes obsessively focused on transmission. A secure, wealthy institution builds monuments, cathedrals, massive headquarters, heavily branded infrastructure.
But a persecuted movement builds living chains of transmission.
Because a chain of people can survive when the headquarters is burned to the ground. If the life of the movement is tied to a building, it dies when the building falls.
But if it's tied to ordinary people, it becomes unkillable. Okay, I understand the survival mechanic, but I have to push back a little on the reliability of this method.
Sure. What's the concern?
Well, if you pass complex information down a long, multi-generational chain of people, from Paul to Timothy to faithful people to others, human nature suggests you're going to end up with a massive game of telephone.
Right. The message degrades.
Exactly. By the time the message hits the 4th generation, the original truth is usually distorted, watered down, or just completely unrecognizable. How does a decentralized chain prevent ideological drift?
That is the primary anxiety of the modern corporate mindset, right?
Yeah.
This belief that quality control requires centralization.
Yeah, that's what we're all taught.
But the ancient blueprint actually accounts for this. Notice the parameters Paul sets. He doesn't say, whisper this secret philosophy to someone in private.
Oh, right. He explicitly says, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses.
Exactly. The transmission relies on public truth that is actively tested and lived out in a community setting. It isn't a private mystical code. It's a shared reality.
And the mechanism of transfer isn't just speaking either. The verb is entrust.
And entrust changes the entire dynamic.
Mm.
You speak information to a crowd, but you entrust a way of life to a steward.
Right. Entrustment implies significant risk.
But it also demands heavy accountability. You are handing over the keys to the house, not just describing what the house looks like.
And who is he entrusting this to? Because the blueprint doesn't specify passing it to the most charismatic speakers.
Or the most intellectually brilliant scholars or the most efficient administrators. No, the sole qualifier is faithful people.
Which flies in the face of how we recruit talent today. I mean, we look for raw talent, visibility, charisma. We want the person who can command the stage or dominate a boardroom.
We do. But focusing on raw talent is a fundamental error if your actual goal is multiplication.
Why is that?
Because talent and charisma are not publicly reproducible assets. You cannot teach someone how to be naturally charismatic or how to have an innate, towering intellect.
Right. Those are basically genetic or temperamental lottery tickets.
Exactly. But character, faithfulness,
Right.
reliability, those are entirely reproducible. A faithful person is stable under pressure. They are a reliable carrier of the DNA.
Wow. So talent might attract a massive crowd for a weekend, but only faithfulness can build a resilient movement over a century.
That's exactly it.
The text uses this brilliant analogy to describe the physics of this transmission, the candle analogy.
I love this one.
Right, so imagine you are standing in a pitch-black room holding a single lit candle. If you use the flame from your candle to light a second candle, your original flame doesn't diminish.
It doesn't lose half of its heat or half of its brightness.
Exactly. The act of lighting other candles is actually how the candle fulfills its ultimate nature, which is to eliminate the darkness.
The light in the room just multiplies.
And the underlying argument is that truth, grace, and authentic organizational life operate on the exact same principle. The message does not lose its potency when it's shared and entrusted to others.
It actually gains reach and power, which stands in direct opposition to our instinct to hoard power at the center.
Because in a centralized system, power is a finite resource. If I give you power, I have less power.
But in a generative ecology, power and life are infinite. The original flame was never intended to be a terminal point. It was designed to be a bearer of fire.
It's just so countercultural. And what's fascinating is that Paul didn't just invent this 4-generation reproduction model out of thin air while sitting in his cell.
No, he inherited it from the founder.
Right. To truly understand the mechanics of this, we have to look at the actual methodology of Jesus, because his approach to building a movement completely shatters every single metric of success taught in modern business schools.
I mean, if you hired a high-end consulting firm today to launch a global movement from scratch, their playbook would be entirely predictable.
What would they say?
They would advise you to maximize early exposure, leverage every piece of mass media available, secure high-profile endorsements, and build the largest possible audience as quickly as humanly possible.
Right. The goal is market saturation.
But Jesus operated with a methodology that was intensely, almost frustratingly counterintuitive. He actively avoided crowds when they tried to make him a king.
He literally walked away from the massive crowds.
Yeah. He didn't start by building a mass audience. He started by prioritizing deep proximity with a handful of individuals.
The phrase that captures this perfectly from the text is presence before performance, formation before function.
He didn't hand them a strategic plan. He gave them access to his life.
And he intentionally selected a small group of ordinary, highly unfinished people, fishermen, tax collectors, political zealots.
His primary goal wasn't just to get them to memorize his lectures. He formed them deeply with the explicit intention of multiplying his presence through them.
So discipleship in this context wasn't like a classroom exercise where you take notes and pass a written exam.
No, it was an immersive apprenticeship. They learned by watching how he navigated reality.
Right. They watched how he handled constant interruptions, how he treated the marginalized when no one important was looking.
How he constantly withdrew from the pressure of the crowd to pray. He was replicating a way of being, not just transferring a data set.
And a massive part of that apprenticeship was participation. He didn't wait until they were perfectly polished professionals before sending them out to do the work.
By modern HR standards, they were entirely unqualified.
Totally unqualified. He sent them out, and predictably, they failed constantly.
They argued about who was the greatest. They misunderstood his core teachings. They panicked during storms.
But instead of firing them or disqualifying them for poor performance, he used their failures as the raw material for their formation.
The messiness wasn't a liability for him. It was the curriculum.
That is such a perspective shift. And the theological logic behind this approach is vital to understand.
Because the entire leadership style of Jesus was fundamentally oriented toward departure.
Oriented toward departure. Honestly, that is a deeply uncomfortable concept for most leaders today.
Oh, absolutely.
What does that actually look like in practice?
It means every decision he made, every lesson he taught, and every responsibility he delegated was shaped by the knowledge that he was going to leave them.
His earthly ministry had a hard stop.
Exactly. Therefore, his goal was never to build their long-term dependence on his physical proximity. He was intentionally building their capacity to operate in his absence.
Wow. And human leadership almost always defaults to the opposite, doesn't it?
Subconsciously or sometimes overtly, we seek to make ourselves indispensable. We build systems where our approval, our vision, or our energy is the bottleneck.
Because the ego loves to hear, we couldn't do this without you.
Right. But Jesus led in a way that essentially communicated, you need my spirit, but you do not need my physical body in the room to carry this mission to the ends of the earth.
You know, it closely mirrors the mechanics of healthy parenting.
Oh, for sure.
Because the entire goal of raising a child is to eventually make yourself unnecessary to their daily survival.
Yeah, you don't raise kids with the secret hope that they will live in your basement forever.
Right. Relying on you to cook every meal and make every decision. No, you form them deeply, you teach them how to navigate the world, and then you launch them.
You build their capacity to start their own households and raise their own children.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how many modern leaders, whether in corporate America, in nonprofits, or in community groups, are secretly terrified of becoming unnecessary.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Because if your core identity is tied up in being the indispensable hero of the story, you will inevitably build a fragile system that traps your followers in a state of permanent dependence.
The fear of irrelevance is literally the hidden driver behind massive centralized infrastructure.
And the methodology of Jesus is beautifully illustrated in the historical account of the feeding of the multitudes.
Okay, let's look at that. You have a massive crowd of thousands of people, and they are starving.
Right. And Jesus possessed the capability to perform a highly centralized direct miracle. He could have just materialized the bread directly into the hands or mouths of every single person there.
Which would have been incredibly efficient.
Very efficient. But he chose a different route.
He broke the bread, but then he handed it to the disciples and made them do the actual distribution.
The miracle was designed to pass through their hands. He used them as the conduits.
So in the middle of a crisis, he was teaching them in real time that they are meant to be active distributors of grace.
Not just passive consumers watching a spectacle. By putting the resources in their hands, he transferred the responsibility to them.
Man, if the founder's model was entirely focused on forming a few people deeply so they could go out, reproduce that life, and distribute it outward, well, it highlights a terrifying reality about the modern landscape.
It really does. We have completely reversed the order of operations.
We are trying to build the outcome without planting the seed.
Which brings us to a structural analysis of how communities are actually built today. The modern approach heavily prioritizes the container.
The container, like the real estate.
Right. We secure the real estate, we build the impressive infrastructure, we develop a polished brand, we launch high-quality weekend programs.
And then we cross our fingers and desperately hope that genuine reproducing life will somehow emerge as a byproduct of all that well-managed activity.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It's like we build the aquarium and just assume the fish will magically appear and start breeding.
Exactly. We mistake the scaffolding for the building, but the organic blueprint demands the exact reverse sequence. Life must precede structure.
Right. Deeply formed people are the seed, and the visible community or organization is the organic fruit that emerges from their shared life and mission.
You cannot manufacture life with infrastructure. A multi-million-dollar building, a world-class sound system, and a perfectly executed marketing campaign do not create a living movement.
What do they create?
They create a highly efficient religious or social corporation.
Yeah, and that structural reality introduces this tension between what the text calls generative resilience and institutional fragility.
Okay, let's unpack those terms.
So, if a community or an organization relies entirely on specialized infrastructure to survive, like if it absolutely needs the massive building, the polished media team, and the celebrity-level speaker just to convince people to show up every week, it is fundamentally fragile.
It is that skyscraper with a rotting foundation we talked about earlier.
Exactly. A severe economic downturn, A scandal with the central leader or a massive cultural shift can bring the entire thing crashing down overnight.
But generative resilience operates on completely different frequency. Resilience means the actual life, the DNA of the movement, has taken deep root inside the ordinary people.
And because the life is decentralized and embedded in the individuals, the movement can survive in drastically simplified forms.
It can thrive meeting in living rooms, it can adapt to severe persecution in hostile environments, it can cross cultural barriers effortlessly.
Because it survives because the life is carried by the people, not generated by a central building or a central budget.
Right. And there is a severe diagnostic thought experiment used to test this resilience. It's called the year-off test.
The year-off test. For you listening, imagine looking at your own organization, your business, or your community group. Now imagine a scenario where you have to forcibly remove all the visible scaffolding for one entire year.
You strip away the building.
You cancel the central gatherings, you eliminate the professional staff, you shut down the platforms and the carefully curated schedules. What remains?
If the professional coordinating layer vanishes, do the people know what to do?
And the panic that question induces in leadership circles is very telling.
It induces panic because deep down, many leaders know the answer.
Right. If the visible system vanishes and the people are paralyzed, if they don't know how to support one another, how to teach each other, how to advance the mission without a professional holding their hand, then the massive system you spent years building wasn't actually an engine for growth.
It was a crutch. You haven't been building capacity, you've been training dependence.
You've taught them how to be excellent audience members but terrible participants.
Ouch. That's harsh, but it's true. To visualize the difference in these structural outcomes, consider the ecology of two rivers from the text.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Look at River A. It is fed by one massive, powerful, centralized source like a giant geyser or a massive dam release. Right near the source, the river looks incredibly impressive.
It's deep, it's loud, it's moving with tremendous force.
Exactly. But as that water flows outward and travels away from the origin point, it inevitably gets weaker, shallower, and eventually dissipates into the dry ground.
And crucially, if anything blocks that one main source, the entire river downstream dries up immediately.
Because it's the centralized addition-based model. It's spectacular at the center, but incredibly weak at the margins.
Now look at River B. River B isn't fed by one massive source. It starts small, but it is fed by a network of hundreds, eventually thousands of small hidden tributaries.
So it might look entirely unimpressive at any single origin point.
Right, but as it moves, it continuously gathers strength from all these distributed sources. It becomes wide, deep, and utterly unstoppable.
If a boulder falls and dams up one tributary, it doesn't matter. The river just routes around it and keeps flowing because the source is decentralized.
And that is the multiplication-based model.
So if the ultimate goal is to cultivate River B, a resilient, highly distributed network of reproducing life, the challenge becomes practical.
How do you shift an organization from relying on a central geyser to developing thousands of tributaries?
How do you test if your current systems are actually building a network of producers, or if they're just accidentally cultivating better, more demanding consumers?
The primary diagnostic tool for solving that problem is called the reproducibility test.
And this acts as a filter for every single initiative, program, or method you deploy.
The test is a single, uncompromising question. Can what is being taught, modeled, and practiced be copied easily by an ordinary person?
And that word easily is where the friction lies. Because if the process requires an expert, if it can only be executed by someone with an advanced degree, a massive budget, or a charismatic stage presence, then the system is bottlenecked by design.
It might be a beautiful, highly effective process in the hands of the expert, but it is fundamentally non-reproducible.
The core thesis here asserts that simplicity is not a downgrade. It is the absolute precondition for transmission.
Because complexity is the natural enemy of multiplication.
Exactly. Let's break down the mechanics of shifting from complex addition to simple multiplication. The text guides us through the 5 principles of reproducibility.
Okay, the first principle directly attacks our modern bias against simplicity. We tend to view simple things as elementary or lacking depth.
But simplicity is not a downgrade. If a process is highly specialized, it requires a constant supply of specialists to keep it alive.
Right. The commands and teachings of Jesus were infinitely profound, yet they were entirely portable. They didn't require a temple to be understood. They could travel into fishing boats, living rooms, and marketplaces.
Which leads to the second principle. It shifts the environment of learning. Proximity is the classroom of discipleship.
You cannot learn how to embody a way of life by sitting in rows taking notes while someone lectures from a stage.
Right. Information transfer can happen in a lecture hall, but life replication requires proximity.
You learn how to navigate conflict by watching a mentor navigate conflict. You learn how to listen by being listened to. Proximity allows the unscripted moments of life to become the primary curriculum.
Which ties us perfectly into the third principle. It challenges the professionalization of the mission. Trust ordinary believers.
We have culturally divided the world into two distinct classes, haven't we? The professional ministers, or leaders, and the passive receivers.
We really have. But the original design assumed that the primary role of leadership was to equip the ordinary people to do the work.
Not to do all the work on a stage while the ordinary people watched and applauded.
Trusting ordinary people with real responsibility is literally the only way to unlock the hidden capacity within the network.
And that brings us to the fourth principle. Measure what you value. Organizations inevitably become what they measure.
That's a universal law. If you spend all your time, energy, and dashboard space measuring weekend attendance and financial giving, you will inevitably engineer a culture that produces attendees and donors.
But if you want a culture of reproduction, you have to find ways to measure reproduction. You have to ask, are the people we are training actively leading and forming others?
The metric shifts from how many people are in the room to how many people are being sent out of the room.
Huge shift. And the fifth principle addresses the fear of losing control. Decentralization is not disorder.
Because when leaders hear the word decentralization, their brains immediately picture chaos, anarchy, and a complete breakdown of brand consistency.
Oh, for sure. But healthy decentralization is about distributed responsibility under a shared alignment.
It means the life and the authority to act move freely throughout the entire body instead of constantly bottlenecking at the head.
Now, implementing those 5 principles usually triggers intense pushback, particularly from leaders who value high production quality. I mean, I feel that pushback myself. When I hear terms like simplicity, anyone can do it, and decentralize, my immediate reaction is concern for quality control.
Right, because we appreciate excellence.
Exactly. We want the communication to be sharp, the environments to be beautiful, the organization to be tight and professional. Doesn't an obsessive focus on reproducibility run the risk of just lowering the bar?
Are we supposed to celebrate sloppiness and mediocrity and just label it simplicity?
Right, that's the fear.
But the argument does not endorse mediocrity. It explicitly clarifies that chaos and disorder masquerading as humility do not serve the mission.
Okay, that's a relief.
Excellence absolutely has value. Clear communication, thoughtful planning, and beautiful environments matter. But it draws a very hard line regarding the hierarchy of value.
Which is?
Excellence must serve transfer, not replace it.
Wow. Excellence must serve transfer.
If you build a system or an experience that is breathtakingly beautiful and executed with flawless precision, but it is so complex and expensive that it is entirely impossible for anyone else in the network to duplicate it.
You have not built a movement, you have built a monument.
Yes, and monuments are static. They are designed to be admired by crowds. Movements are dynamic. They are designed to be spread by participants.
There is a vivid architectural analogy in the text that locks this concept into place. Imagine 2 builders.
Craftsman A and Craftsman B.
Right. Craftsman A is a master. He builds a gorgeous, intricate shelter. The joinery is flawless. He uses exotic materials shipped in from across the world, and the design is a marvel of complex engineering.
It's an absolute masterpiece.
But because of its complexity, it requires highly specialized tools and his direct, constant supervision to maintain.
So if a severe storm hits and damages the roof, the people living inside are completely helpless.
Exactly. They don't have the tools or the knowledge to fix it. They just have to sit in the rain and wait for Craftsman A to arrive and save them.
Now look at Craftsman B. He builds a simple, incredibly durable shelter using locally accessible materials and clear, straightforward instructions.
It isn't going to win an architectural award for avant-garde design.
No, but it is warm, it is dry, and crucially, a normal family can easily understand how it was built.
So if a storm damages the roof, they don't need to panic. They can grab basic tools, repair it themselves, and go back to sleep.
Even better, they can take the blueprint and teach the family next door how to build their own shelter.
And when the real storms hit cultural shifts, economic crises, persecution, Craftsman B's model is the only one that survives. It adapts and it spreads.
Because Craftsman A built a brilliant masterpiece of dependency, but Craftsman B built a reproducible haven.
That is just so clear. Now, transitioning individuals and entire organizations from the mindset of craftsman A to craftsman B requires a clear understanding of how spiritual and organizational responsibility actually develops.
And the text maps this progression out through 5 distinct stages of ownership.
Let's walk through those. It starts with stage 1, the believer.
Right. This is simply someone who has encountered the message, trusted it, and entered into the community. They are in the door.
Then stage 2 is the disciple. This moves beyond mere intellectual agreement. A disciple is someone who is actively learning to obey and integrate the practices of the faith into the rhythm of their daily life.
They are being formed.
Right. Then stage 3 is where the most critical paradigm shift happens. The disciple maker.
This is the person who has absorbed enough life that they are now capable of reproducing it into another person.
They aren't just eating the food, they're learning how to cook and feed others.
Exactly. Stage 4 is the church planter, or the community builder. This is someone with the capacity to gather those reproducing disciples and establish a new, cohesive, local community.
And finally, stage 5 is the movement catalyst. This is a leader operating at a macro level, focusing on creating the broader environmental conditions where multiplication becomes the normal, everyday reality for entire networks of communities.
Now, the diagnostic value of mapping those 5 stages is identifying where the flow of life stops in your organization.
Because a weakness at any of these transitions creates a structural bottleneck.
Right, but historically and currently, the most common and devastating break in the chain happens between stage 2 and stage 3.
The leap from disciple to disciple maker.
Yes, modern systems are incredibly efficient at producing stage 2 disciples. People know how to receive teaching, how to attend events, and how to consume religious or organizational goods.
But they are almost never practically equipped with the tools or the permission to become transmitters.
They remain permanent consumers.
So to fix that specific bottleneck, leaders and individuals have to take highly actionable steps. It requires moving from philosophical agreement to actual behavioral change.
The first necessary step is identifying one specific pathway or process in your organization that can be simplified without losing its core substance.
You don't cut corners on the truth, obviously, but you strip away the layers of polished complexity that are making it impossible for a normal person to lead it.
The second step is a shift in leadership training. We have to train leaders to think generationally, not programmatically.
What's the difference there?
A programmatic leader looks at the calendar and asks, how do we fill this room next weekend? But a generational leader looks at the room and asks, what kind of people are we forming today, and what will they be capable of reproducing 3 years from now?
The timeline for success expands from days to decades.
Exactly. The third action step forces you to redesign. You take one core ministry expression or community practice and redesign it so that a brand new learner could understand it, participate in it, and confidently imitate it quickly.
If a new person watches your process and thinks, I could never do that without a degree, your process is too complex.
Yep. And the fourth step is the most urgent, and it requires immediate execution. Entrust a faithful person with a reproducible pattern this month and set the explicit expectation that they will pass it on.
Do not just teach them a concept, hand them the actual responsibility.
Right. Say to them, I'm giving you this, and I expect you to train someone else in it by next quarter.
But there is a severe warning attached to all of these steps. You cannot take the concept of multiplication, slap a new label on it, and turn it into a 6-week organizational campaign.
You can't just create a department of multiplication within a massive centralized bureaucracy.
You cannot bolt a multiplication engine onto a chassis designed for addition. It will tear the machine apart.
It literally will. It cannot be a program because it has to be a core identity. Transitioning to this model requires a fundamental shift in what we call spiritual anthropology, how we fundamentally view the people sitting in the room.
If a leader subconsciously views the crowd as consumers whose primary purpose is to fund the budget and validate the leader's vision, they will inevitably build a system that coddles consumers.
But if a leader views every ordinary person as a potential carrier of divine life, equipped to pioneer and reproduce, they will build a reproductive ecology.
It all circles back to measurement. If you measure attendance, you breed consumers. If you measure empowerment, you breed catalysts.
Which brings the entire deep dive down to a deeply personal challenge for you listening right now.
It forces you to look in the mirror and ask a severe diagnostic question about your own life, your own participation in your community, or your own leadership style.
Are you operating as a consumer, constantly asking, what am I getting out of this? Am I being fed, Does this organization cater to my preferences?
Or have you made the shift to becoming a reproducer, asking, what life am I carrying? What truth have I been entrusted with? And exactly who am I currently forming with it?
Because when you synthesize all the historical context, the analogies, and the structural critiques we've unpacked today, the relevance of this blueprint extends far beyond a traditional church or religious context.
Even though that's the source material's primary focus.
Right. The mechanics of human organization are universal. Whether you are leading a volatile tech startup, managing a mid-level corporate team, building a grassroots community organization, or simply trying to raise a healthy family.
The core truth of generative resilience remains identical. True success in any of those fields is not making yourself indispensable.
If the entire project, the department, or the family system completely falls apart the moment you leave the room, you have not built a resilient movement.
You have just constructed a highly stressful monument to your own ego and capability.
Ouch. But true.
True. Lasting success is embedding your values, your knowledge, and your vitality so deeply into ordinary people that the mission not only survives, but actually thrives and multiplies long after you have left the building.
And achieving that level of decentralized success requires a profound act of surrender from the leader. It requires letting go of the need to control every single variable.
Which brings us to a final anchoring thought from the text, rooted in a very old agrarian truth.
A seed must fall into the earth and die if it is going to bear fruit. If it stays safe on the shelf, it remains a single seed forever.
So look at your own life, your own projects, and your own leadership structures. What impressive thing are you currently holding on to?
What centralized control mechanism, what complex but fragile system, or what deep-seated need for personal visibility might you actually need to bury into the ground so that a true reproducing movement can finally take root?
We started today by talking about looking at the shiny facade of a massive skyscraper, assuming it was strong simply because it dominated the skyline.
But now you know how to check the foundation.
The real strength of an organization isn't in the height of the glass and steel, the size of the budget, or the charisma of the leader.
The true test of strength is whether the architecture is designed to reproduce itself in the lives of the ordinary people who walk through its doors.
If the power cord gets pulled on the treadmill tomorrow, does your movement stop dead in its tracks, or does it walk out the door, adapt, and spread?
The enduring strength is always hidden in the seed, never in the warehouse.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration into the hidden mechanics of growth has challenged your assumptions and provided some clarity on how things actually endure. Keep examining your foundations, keep simplifying the complex, and above all, focus on multiplying the life you've been entrusted with. We will catch you on the next one.